Welcome, dear listener. I have a question for you. Why did Alexander arrive with admiration and plans, and why did Babylon answer him with craft rather than fear? Tonight we will step over a stone threshold and onto streets that remember sandals better than traffic, where a reed mat sighs in the doorway, barley bread cools on a wooden tray, and the river keeps time with a long patient sentence. If this cosy story helps you drift off, please subscribe, tap like, and leave a gentle comment. Your support keeps the journey continues. We begin when night begins. Set your phone face down. Let its blue light nap for once. In the quiet that follows, let a different glow take its place. Picture a clay shelf on a mud brick wall, a small lamp cupping a tame flame, the wick giving off a soft thread of smoke that smells faintly of sesame. The room is cool against the evening, plaster, smoothed by careful hands and years of touch. Outside, the river moves with the slow confidence of something that has always known its way. We are in Babylon at the start of its first dynasty, when the streets are still learning their curves and the city is practicing how to be a city. There is a hush here that belongs to beginnings. The Euphrates is a voice in the dark, steady and practical. It speaks to canals and fields and to the small boats that nudge the banks with nose ropes like patient animals. Each morning this city wakes and remembers that order does not arrive like thunder. Order is coaxed. It is measured with string. It is checked with a plumb bob made from clay and hope. It is sharpened by scribes who bend over damp tablets and press neat wedges into the surface until language appears as rows of little bird tracks heading somewhere sensible. You could hand one of those scribes a modern budget app and they would not flinch. The categories would feel familiar. Barley in, silver out, rent due. A helpful reminder that tomorrow is not a suggestion. The reed stylus sits in the hand like a trusted pen. The tablet itself warms in the sun on a flat roof until it hardens from soft promise into official memory. It is an inbox that cannot be misplaced under a cushion, and it is also a kind of roof tile for the mind, shingle thought protecting the household from the rain of confusion. Walk with me through a lane where the air carries the smell of baking and clay dust. The ground is packed earth, swept in the morning with fresh palm fronds. Door frames are wood set into brick, polished by the same hands that open and close them a dozen times a day. Over a doorway, a reed mat throws a small square of shade, and under it a child sets a tiny cart on the ground and pulls it by a string that has seen better days. The cart is made from broken pot pieces fitted into a shape that allows for the noble work of pretending. The child drags it with a seriousness that would impress a palace official. There is a potter at a wheel nearby. The wheel hums with the kind of rhythm that keeps time for a whole street. A baker beats the ashes out of yesterday's oven. A woman combs another woman's hair with a bone comb that remembers the hand that carved it. A boatman checks a knot as if the knot were new to the world and needed a mentor. Someone inspects a copper pan for a dent and then decides the dent is a story with charm. From the temple district a conch shell calls and then rests. It is a city with jobs that have learned to like their owners. A king presides over this world, but do not picture a throne floating above daily life. Picture instead an office with a very serious table. And a man who understands that the river keeps its own calendar. The dynasty begins small and grows by habit. Walls are placed not only to impress, but to define the daily path of carts and goats and people who keep misplacing their sandals. Gates are given names, markets select their corners. The city does not invent bread, but it improves breakfast. When Hammurabi takes the stage, he does not arrive like lightning. He arrives like a planner who has been reading the room for years. Under him, the city acquires the tone of a household that has decided to label its jars. The famous laws are more than a stern speech. They are a way to make sure the strong remember their manners and the weak remember their rights. They touch contracts, wages, weights, repairs, and the 1,000 ordinary accidents that happen whenever humans share space and try to keep a straight face about it. The laws speak in the voice of a city that likes certainty. If you borrow, repay. If you measure, measure honestly. If you build, build soundly so no one has to hold up a wall with their forehead. Some articles feel foreign to us and belong to another age. The wider melody, though, is familiar. It hums with the wish for fairness, a wish that cities are still trying to make real between morning coffee and late afternoon traffic. In the archives, officials stack clay tablets by topic. The storage rooms smell the way a patient library smells, a mix of dust, oil, and the satisfaction of things being in their place. Cylinder seals hang from cords, and each seal is a private little parade of lions and gods and symbols that say, "I am me, and this is mine." To seal a document, a steward rolls that tiny parade across the clay and leaves behind proof that art and administration can be the same sentence. The grand buildings rise by the same logic as a well-made basket, brick by brick, row by row. A ziggurat lifts itself over the rooftops until it decides to stop at a height that feels respectful to heaven and kind to the workers. In the courtyards of temples, incense curls, and the gods receive the polite offerings that households also like to receive. Bread that is still warm, milk that has not forgotten the morning, dates that sweeten the tongue and the mood. The city breathes together during festivals. Processions move in a measured way. Musicians tune instruments that prefer harmony over heroics. Children try to see without getting scolded. There is laughter where there should be. Daily life keeps a careful ledger of small joys. At dawn the millstone sings, a low round sound like the beginning of a kind thought. The market comes to itself under suncloth. Figs pile up until they look like a decision. Sesame oil warms onions in a pan, and the whole neighbourhood briefly forgives every inconvenience. A weaver knots the end of a pattern and runs a thumb across the border to make sure the story the cloth is telling does not wander off. A carpenter leans a straight edge against a new lintel and waits for the lintel to admit the truth. A teacher writes out signs for a student whose mind is elsewhere and then pretends not to notice when the student returns from that elsewhere with a better question. Letters move along the river roads. They move across dry land in bags carried by men with good sandals and a sense of direction. They cross from city to city in the wider world where Babylon is more than a local address. A letter can travel for weeks and still arrive with news gentle enough to be welcomed at a gate. The clay envelope cracks in a careful hand, and the voice of someone far away steps into the room as if they had been standing outside the whole time. Here too there are comparisons that make the past feel nearby. A scribe writes late and tells himself he will go to bed early tomorrow. A trader swears he's only going to buy flax, but comes home with copper he could not resist. A farmer claims he will repair the gate when the weather cools, and then repeats this brave promise each season in turn. The city is full of resolutions that cannot help smiling at themselves. If you have ever put a label on a box, and then put the box somewhere safe, and then had to label the somewhere safe, you and old Babylon are cousins. When judgments are made, they are made with witnesses who know the difference between truth and enthusiasm. When debts are forgiven, they are forgiven with ceremony so that mercy has a place to stand. We can speak softly about the frictions that grow wherever people share water and streets. There are disputes about irrigation and fields. There are questions about deliveries and defective pots. We do not linger on quarrels. We listen instead to the after-sounds, the healthy sigh a city makes when an agreement lands well, and the parties remember that they are neighbours before they are rivals. One day in the palace, a steward inventories the tools of state. There are tall measures for grain. There are weights of pleasing accuracy that feel heavy with justice. There are tablets that account for soldiers and for the wages that buy them sandals and salt. The steward pauses and holds a favourite stylus like a small bird. It writes a little better than the others. The steward will not say this out loud because a favourite stylus is a personal matter. Even scholars have hobbies. On the river, a barge slides forward with a cargo that shines. The boatmen judge the current by the way reeds bow and tell each other the exact spot where the river hides a thoughtless ridge of sand. They are right, of course. Boatmen are philosophers in sandals. A rope creaks and then is quiet. A jar of water sits in the shade and turns cool simply by being patient. This is a lesson worth carrying into tomorrow. In houses across the city, the heart of comfort is a platform bed that remembers every nap. Over it, a wool blanket keeps the day's heat where it belongs, and sends the night's cool down to tickle cheeks and fingers. On a shelf, a jar of dates waits for morning. In the corner, a basket holds tools and a bundle of rushes for lights yet to be lit. The architecture is not dramatic. The rooms do not believe in showmanship. They believe in being useful without complaint, in holding a family together with good corners. As years pass, the city grows wise in its habits. It learns how to repair a wall in a way that makes the repair look like a compliment to the original. It teaches brick to behave, It teaches streets to meet at the correct angle for breeze and conversation. It instructs its citizens in the art of waiting their turn. The patience it takes to wait for a tablet to dry is the same patience it takes to listen fully to a friend. The people here know both kinds. Hammurabi's years carry the feeling of a city finding its voice and then using that voice to set the tempo for anything important. Trade listens. Temples listen. The countryside listens because it appreciates a city that keeps track of the calendar and pays its obligations like a grown-up. The dynasty is not a firework that burns and vanishes. It is a long evening of steady lamplight, a time when the air itself seems to affirm that plans are worth making. Not all news is gentle. Far away, other powers practice their own kinds of certainty. Their horses find the roads. Their messengers learn the names of Babylon's gates without asking twice. We do not replay the shocks and rattle the peace of this room. It is enough to know that a day comes when the first dynasty's long breath meets a wind from outside. The ending interrupts like a draft through a door that was just closed. For a while the city gathers itself like a person who's been woken too early. But a city that knows how to keep house knows how to recover. The lamps do not refuse to be lit. The ovens do not forget the taste of dough. The water channels remember their path once the sludge is lifted and the edges are smoothed. People sweep, people measure, people make the old prayers in voices that do not tremble. Babylon has learned the craft of continuity. Whatever the world does at its loudest, the answer at the street level is always the same. Sweep, repair, teach, cook, record, rest. Let us return to a single scene as a night comes down. A father and a child sit near the doorway where a breeze knows the way in. The father shows how to roll a cylinder seal across a patch of damp clay, steady and even, so the tiny lions do not trip over their own paws. The child laughs because the trick feels like magic. The seal lifts away and the pattern remains. That is the art of cities. Lift the hand away and the pattern remains. On this roof, and a woman checks the drying tablets and turns each one slightly, so the edges harden without curling. She does this as gently as you would turn a sleeping child so an arm does not go numb. From the alley, a vendor calls out a last offer as if he is singing an old song that always ends the same way. Behind a wall, someone rehearses a prayer under their breath and seems to find the word they were looking for. The darkness arrives without argument. The lamp's flame leans and then steadies. You might feel that flame in your own room now. A small companion keeping a weather eye on the night. You might hear the long sound of a river that is both real and imagined. You might feel the weight of a wool blanket, even if your blanket is made from other fibres and other times. That is the gift of this city's first long chapter. It teaches you that order can be a comfort and not a cage. It teaches you that fairness has a sound, the quiet clink of a weight meeting its measure. It suggests that tomorrow will be better if you label your jars today. And it says this with a smile because everyone knows you will probably label them next week. Babylon in these years is a school for steadiness. Its walls are sentences about patience written in baked clay. Its gates are punctuation that lets the story breathe. Its markets are paragraphs about bargaining and trust. Its temples are hymns to the idea that people together can form a single clear intention. If you could put your ear to the bricks, you would hear what bricks like to say. Hold fast, hold shape, hold warmth, hold memory. Now the lamp on our clay shelf flickers once and the wick pulls in a little more oil. The flame draws a triangle of gold on the wall, and a moth pretends it is a scholar of light. Outside, the Euphrates keeps shouldering its way past the moorings with the same old patience. The dynasty's book closes for the night and the city turns a page it cannot yet read. That is all right. The next page will meet us in its own time. For now we listen to the room settle. We notice how the jar lid clicks into place. We taste the last sweet of a date. We let our breath match the river. Good night, first city of laws and lists and long intentions. Good night, scribes with inkless pens and faithful styluses. Good night, gate that knows the names of returning carts. Good night, oven that forgives every crooked loaf. Good night, lamp drawing gold on clay. When morning comes, you will measure again, and bake again, and write down the promises people make to each other. For now, rest inside the hush you built. Set the lamp back on its shelf and listen for the city's first breath after a long exhale. The first dynasty has ended, and yet the night has not forgotten how to be kind. Babylon does what wise places do when the world grows loud. It straightens its rooms. It tightens its knots. It sweeps in the direction of the door and sends the dust out to contemplate its choices. Morning comes like a quiet visitor who knows where the cups are kept. The river keeps its patient voice. The streets remember their curves. A new house takes charge with the gentle confidence of someone who has mended a lot of hinges. These are the Kassite years, and they last long enough for the city to learn the deep art of steady. Imagine a mason setting down his tools at sunrise, palm on brick, checking yesterday's cure the way a baker checks a loaf for its hollow song. The Kassite kings have a talent for renovation. They like repairs that do not call attention to themselves. They approve of water that arrives when asked. They value a gate that swings without comment. The kingdom wears a new name in official speech, and Babylon still beats at its centre like a reliable heart. In these streets, order is not a performance. It is a posture. It is the way a door stands when it has been properly hung. Paper does not exist, but paperwork thrives. Clerks lean over clay and coax clarity from damp rectangles. They write what land belongs to whom, and what boundaries follow which old ditch, and who promise to bring which measure of barley when the moon has crossed the right part of the sky. Their tools are simple, which only makes their work more elegant. A reed pressed into clay, a seal rolled across a surface until its procession of gods and animals stands up as if to be counted. The result is an object with weight and texture and a voice. You can set it on a shelf and it will hum to future years. This is what happened. These are the witnesses. Please return this tablet to its proper drawer. The Kassite habit of recording land grants leads to stones you could recognize even in the dark by the way they hold themselves. They are boundary stones, which many people call kuduru, and they carry carved signs that work like a small choir. Here is the emblem of a god who guards the fields. Here is a star shape that remembers the sky. Here is a scorpion that insists on the prickly truth of borders. The surface becomes a constellation you can touch. A farmer would stand before such a stone, feel the cool under his fingers, and know that his boundary line did not begin and end with his own opinion. It is a comforting thing to belong somewhere with proof you can polish. Inside households, proof takes other forms. A loom with a pattern you can follow with your eyes closed. A jar with a nick near the rim that makes it easy to recognise even in the half-light before dawn. A comb that stays faithful to one family's hair for years. The smell of sesame oil warming in a pan, and the hum of grain being ground, and the soft slap of dough as it meets a tray. Daily life learns its route and walks it with grace. The people of Babylon do not spend all day worrying about kings. They worry about the wash that needs sun, and the pot that prefers not to boil over, and the price of onions at the market. Civilization at ground level has always been a conversation with onions. The city's public works become a kind of shared calendar. Canal dredging has its season. Roof patching waits for a string of dry days, and a mason with a fondness for straight lines. Courtyards are swept in the morning when shadows are still considerate. Temple porters oil hinges that have begun to speak too loudly. There are festivals that move like music through the streets, and even those who do not know every hymn know that the right pathways will be followed and the right corners will be turned. The beauty of a procession is the beauty of a known route. Babylon's language becomes a traveller in its own right. Couriers carry clay envelopes to distant courts, and when those envelopes break, the voices inside speak not with local accents but with the measured syllables of Babylonian Akkadian. Kings in other lands reply in the same tongue, because it has become the polite middle ground, the shared table at which rivals can drink water without suspicion. Somewhere in a foreign palace, a scribe copies phrases learned from Babylon and makes them sing in a new room. It is the ancient version of a standard email template, dignified and precise and slightly formal. I trust you are in health. I send this with friendly intention. I am also gently reminding you about that shipment we discussed in the spring. The words do not hurry and they rarely raise their voice. They simply arrive. At the riverside, real goods move with the same steadiness as the words. Boats carry grain and wool, copper tools and small wonders from far places. A stone that caught a blue fire in a mountain half a world away now sits in a jeweller's hand. A dockworker knows from the weight of a crate whether its contents match the promise. A rope knows how to sing when pulled tight at the right angle. Donkeys clop past with expressions that suggest they are above the drama of commerce. They are not above the drama of snacks. Somewhere a child discovers that a date pit will roll across a tile like a champion, and that an older sibling will always pretend not to notice. The Kassite court builds beyond the city as well, raising a royal place on the plain where a new ziggurat stares at the horizon with the calm of a mountain that chose to move into town. If you climb partway up in the evening, the plain becomes a quilt at your feet, stitched with canals and paths that glint with late light. In the distance, the original city still breathes, its towers catching the same red that lives in the dust. Night falls and brings the scent of damp earth and reed and smoke from dung fires that carry meals into being. It is not glamorous. It is reassuring. Diplomacy has its soft theatre. Envoys arrive with gifts that make clever statements. Here is a horse with a glossy coat that says our pastures are generous. Here is a necklace that says we know where to find interesting mountains. Here is a letter that says we remember your father's kindness and we expect yours. Under the words is the practical language of supply and demand. Babylon sits in a world of peers, and its voice along the table is neither a whisper nor a shout. It is a steady tone, reliable, a voice that encourages agreements to stay agreed. Scholars do not stop being curious just because the city is calm. They copy the old tales with careful hands and thick attention. They keep lists of signs and words like a carpenter keeps a tidy box of chisels. They record celestial movements with a patience that would make a clock proud. The night sky becomes a text with its own grammar. Planet here, star there. When this meets that, make a note, but do not rush to claim too much. In another courtyard, a teacher draws the same wedge marks again and again until a student's wrist learns trust. The lesson of these years is patient excellence, an ordinary greatness that hides itself in reliable work. In workshops, craft speaks in whisper and tap. A bronze caster tips a ladle and watches a narrow river of light flow into a mould that waited all day for this single breath. A woodworker rubs oil into the cedar and brings out a colour that makes the heart stand still for a moment before it starts again. A weaver counts notches on a comb and feels a pattern opening under the hands like a story she's heard since childhood. In the corner, a bucket of water holds the room's cool. It is the exact shade of relief. In markets, bargaining is not also war. It is a little play two people have performed together for years. The cloth seller praises the weave and pretends surprise when the buyer offers only so much. The buyer pretends not to have noticed the flaw near the hem, while making sure the seller notices that the buyer has noticed. They bow to the ritual and land on a price that lets both of them tell their families they did well. Coins will come later. In these years, silver by weight does the talking. A small balance scale is the instrument of fairness. When the pans settle, there is a sound that everyone trusts. It is the sound of a promised landing. The temples during Kassite rule are not only houses for gods, they are banks of goodwill and engines of employment. They own fields and lease them. They finance repairs. They keep a memory wider than any one lifetime. The priests are caretakers and accountants and stage managers all at once. They make sure the festivals look and sound right, and they make sure the cattle that pull the statues home have hay and water and shelter when the cheering stops. Sacred does not exclude practical, it relies on it. There is dignity in a broom that knows its role on holy ground. If you could step into a festive day then, you would see streets dressed with garlands and hear the first drums like a far heartbeat moving closer. You would smell resin burning into sweetness and watch as the god passes by within a canopy both heavy and bright. You would feel the press of neighbours who have shared winters and summers and the kind of stories that make a place. Children would be lifted to see, grandparents would be offered stools, merchants would close shutters halfway and then halfway again as if their hands could not quite let go of habit. The city would walk its old route, and everyone would be reminded that belonging sometimes looks like moving together in time. Beyond the festivals, the quiet triumph of the Kassite era is the way roofs do not leak. The way fields flood when asked and drain when asked. The way a courthouse echoes only with voices and not with worry about the building itself. In some years, drought depresses the edges. In other years, neighbouring powers tilt their heads and wonder whether the grass might be greener here. The Kassite response is almost always the same. Maintain, right, repair, negotiate, wait for the season to turn. A long piece is seldom loud. It sounds like competent footsteps and clean water finding its channel. Time, patient as it has been, still keeps count. The wider world stumbles as centuries pass, roots thin, certain that cities cough and cannot quite clear their throats. Storms roll in from directions no one had planned for. In Babylon, the old crafts still work, but the air carries a hush that feels more thoughtful than usual. What happens when the road you use every season becomes less certain? What happens when a signal fire on a distant hill fails to light one night and then fails again? The answer in a resilient city is simple. Light another lamp nearby, then another, then check the roof. The Kassite chapter narrows. New claimants to kingship speak in other accents. Tributary lines pull harder. One year a temple court notices that its storerooms hold more echo than grain. The next year a master mason is asked to postpone a project he had already measured twice. We do not make a drama of it. That is not our task in this hour. We simply say that change has its own agenda, and that Babylon has lived long enough to know how to bend without breaking. There is a moment toward the end of the Kassite rule when a sacred statue goes missing to a foreign capital. The temple's heart fills a gap where a presence used to be. The city continues on its feet because this is what cities do. The brooms still sweep, the kitchens still steam, the scribes still write the rent, but a note of absence threads through the hymns, and the people carry the hope that what has been taken will find its path home again. Hope is a useful thing to carry. It keeps good company with patience. A new dynasty rises in Isin and takes the work in hand with the briskness of someone putting on an apron. Among its kings there is one whose name will later be overshadowed by another with the same first part, and yet his story belongs here for the way it puts a shoulder under the city's mood. Nebuchadnezzar I has the satisfaction of returning what was lost. The great statue comes home with ceremony and quiet tears. The precinct smells again of incense that feels complete. Pride stands up straighter, but not in a way that disturbs the dishes on the shelf. Under these rulers the city tightens its weave. Schools copy texts with renewed affection. The riverbanks are trimmed as if for a festival that never has to end. Contracts acquire a crispness that delights anyone who enjoys seeing totals line up. A storehouse manager finds he can sleep at night because the columns in his ledgers greet one another like old friends and do not bicker. A grandmother tells a child the story of the statue going away and coming back, and the child hears the lesson intended. Things can be mended. The world is not always the sum of its losses. At the domestic scale, nothing has ever truly changed. A cook judges an oven with 2 fingers held near the mouth of its heat and decides the bread can go in. A boy tries to balance a jug on his head and almost succeeds. A girl discovers that if you hold a reed the right way it can be a flute, and that if you hold it the wrong way it can still be a flute, only funnier. A cat rules a windowsill with that careful seriousness cats learn from important people. The family garden grows herbs that add perfume to lunch and medicine to winter. The city breathes into the little things, and the little things repay the favour. Even the humour of the time has the softness of a good quilt. A clerk jokes that his stylus writes better when it has been fed dates. A ferryman swears his boat prefers left bank to right bank and refuses to explain. A priest says the new tassels hang with a discipline the old tassels never mustered, and then smiles, because everyone understands that tassels, like people, have their own ideas. Laughter in these streets travels by eye contact rather than by shout. It does not spill or sting. It rolls like a date pit, then rests where it is wanted. If you stood at dusk under the shade of a kiosk at the market and watched the day fold itself, you would see a city that measures its worth not by what it conquers, but by what it keeps in good repair. The canal's rim is smooth enough to sit on and watch fish correct their course. A length of clean rope loops in a tidy coil near a mooring post, ready to say yes to work. A shop shutter closes in a way that would please a musician who loves a dependable rhythm. From somewhere up the street there comes the smell of sesame cakes cooling on a cloth and the sound of a grandmother insisting you take one more for the road. You take 2. The Kassite reputation can be summed up in an image as simple as a threshold stone polished by countless feet. It is not dramatic. It is not something to point at during a tour with the words "Behold." It is something better. It is proof that life has passed this way every day, and that the passage has left the place stronger and kinder to the next set of footsteps. The kingdom kept accounts that balanced, it kept roads that knew their destinations, it kept a tone of voice that let neighbours notice their common ground. By the time the second dynasty of Isin settles into its work, the era we have travelled through has become a deep foundation. Later builders will stand on it without always knowing which stone belongs to whom. That is the fate of good foundations. They are thanked with silence. But if you press your palm to the city wall in the last light and wait, you can feel the quiet endurance these years laid down like a roadbed. Let us close where quiet always lives. A lamp is trimmed for evening. The wick takes the flame with the ease of a handshake. The room accepts the gold wash and offers us back the details it wants you to see. A bowl with a fine crack that has never dared to widen. A shelf with a thumb's worn hollow. A child's toy cart leaning like an old friend. Outside, the river resumes its night voice and tells the city what rivers always tell cities. Rest, I will keep moving. I'll bring you what the uplands release. I will remember the path even when the clouds hide the moon. Babylon lies down within that promise. The Kassite and Isin rulers, the scribes and masons, the weavers and boatmen, the priests and teachers, all have one last task before sleep. They make sure tomorrow can start on time. A tool is returned to its proper hook. A ledger is covered with a cloth. A door bar slides into its notch with a wooden sigh that could be mistaken for contentment. There is no need to name every builder and every queen. Their gift is not their names. Their gift is the way roofs do not leak and roads do not wander, and promises keep learning how to keep themselves. So we say goodnight to the era of careful hands, goodnight to the boundary stones that turned law into sculpture, goodnight to the letters that taught far kingdoms how to speak to one another without raising their voices, goodnight to the markets that measured fairness in the tilt of a scale pan, goodnight to the festivals that walked their routes until even the streets knew the steps, goodnight to the river that saw all of it and kept its own counsel. When we open our eyes next, the weather of empires will be shifting again, and Babylon will adjust its grip and carry on. For now, the lamp draws its soft triangle of light on a wall that has seen a century of evenings and still finds them worth admiring. A moth draws its own small geometry in the air. A mother pulls up a blanket that holds the memory of late summer. A father listens to the room settle and trusts that the city will meet the dawn with tools ready. In a corner, the cylinder seal waits for morning work, a quiet promise wrapped around a reed cord. Sleep, Babylon of steady hands, return to your long breathing. Tomorrow, teach the plumb line to hang true again. Tomorrow, remind the river which banks to kiss and which to leave for dust. Tomorrow, write another line in the ongoing letter you have been sending to the world. A letter that says the same beautiful thing in many ways. We are still here. We still know how to keep house. The weather changes, not the kind that soaks laundry and blesses barley, but the weather of power. Far to the north, a great neighbour perfects the art of schedules and tall ideas. Its messengers walk fast. Its letters use verbs that never stutter. The name on many lips is Assyria. Babylon lives within reach of that tall shadow, and also within the reach of its own memory. In these centuries, the city becomes a master of the pause between large footsteps. It learns how to be itself while taller boots march somewhere off stage. If you go out early, you will hear the oldest sounds first. A broom moving dust toward the door, a millstone making its round music, a jar lid tapping twice before it settles and agrees to keep the cool where it belongs. The city still drinks from the Euphrates as it always has. It still sets out stalls under shade at the hour when the sun is in a patient mood. A mason draws a string across a course of brick, and the string tells a truth the mason respects. In the school of tablets, a teacher smooths a scrap of damp clay and writes the first few signs of a lesson before the students arrive. It is the same beginning Babylon has trusted for generations. Work first, talk after. For a city, that is a prayer with excellent manners. Now and then the tone of orders changes. A governor arrives with a new seal hanging from his belt and a talent for formal greetings. A scribe from the north sits with local scribes and discovers that their complaints are identical. The ink dries too fast in heat. The stylus breaks when the apprentice sharpens it like a spear. The new official speaks a language the market already understands. He speaks of taxes, of tribute, of repairs that must be accomplished before the river remembers spring. Babylon answers in its own language. It answers in swept thresholds and honest scales and ledgers that make numbers behave. An empire likes to see its reflection in obedience. A city would rather be seen in the shine of well-oiled hinges. You may hear people lower their voices when they speak of years that went thin. They will describe them with household images, because that is how people soften sharp edges. A festival postponed felt like a table with one chair missing. A gate left unguarded felt like a sentence that did not know where to stop. There were seasons when statues went travelling without invitation. There were seasons when the sacred rooms seemed to echo a little more than usual. We will not lean our ears too close to those echoes. Night welcomes gentler talk. It is enough to say that loss is visited, and that the city did not forget itself. You do not forget your name because someone misplaces a cup. You pour water in another and keep going. What is remarkable is not only that the city endures, but the particular way it does so. It chooses again and again the craft of mending. In the temples, the porters sweep carefully as if the floor had feelings. They polish metal that likes to keep a star inside it. They lift cloths and lay them down again until the fold is a small lesson in order. Priests murmur instructions to junior priests that sound like recipes, which in a way they are. Add the hymn at the right moment. Stir the incense at the soft edge of the chant. Set the procession in motion when the light on the paving stones reaches the place where it likes to pause. The god is honoured and the people are steadied. It is the famous old festival road, but walked with a new kind of attention, like a familiar melody played on a repaired instrument. In workshops, a similar patience takes the lead. A plasterer runs a float over a wall, and then again, until the wall forgives last season and remembers only the present. A woodworker seats a new hinge in an old jamb and listens for the tone of yes. A bronze caster moulds a lion thumb, sized for a door ring, and smiles when the metal chooses to be brave. These are not small things to those who do them. Each is a stitch in the grand fabric of the city. If cities were quilts, Babylon in these years would be the one where the mending is so neat, you have to put your nose to the cloth to find it. The scholars keep their lamps and their rooftops. They keep the sky discipline that the city loves as much as any law. A scribe climbs to the top of a house and settles on the mat the way you might settle into a favourite chair. He sets a small board across his knees and looks up. He knows the planets like neighbours. He greets the bright one that lingers near the west and waits for the slow one that prefers patience. He writes lines on clay that will be read on a winter morning years from now by someone who has never met him. In those lines he notes what rose and what sank, and he notes also what the city was doing. He does not claim too much, he simply records. There is a quiet bravery in such careful witnessing. It is the opposite of panic, it is friendship with time. Markets change in their accents and still sound like themselves. Traders arrive speaking new forms of the same human request. I bring this. I hope to take that. Can we bless this transaction so it will return to both our houses with good manners? The answer is found in scale pans that meet in the middle and in the tidy scratch of figures on clay. Babylon makes sure the meeting places are kept clean so that talk can be clear. The canopy poles are checked before noon. The cords are tied with knots that smile. The cloth shades the cucumbers just enough to keep their pride. Silver is weighed with the solemnity of a vow. When a customer leaves with a bundle and a good feeling, that is politics of a sort, the kind that lasts. It would be easy to turn this era into a list of who sat on which throne for how long. We will not do that here. Lists are for the archives and the moments when the roof does not leak. For the voice in the room at night, what matters is how Babylon learned to breathe under another's tempo without losing the beat in its own chest. There were years when the city named a local king, and years when the neighbour named him. There were years when messages flew like swifts from the royal city on the Tigris, and years when the swifts chose other routes. Through it all, the streets were swept. Through it all, the reeds by the river found their green and gift. Through it all, the practice of being a place continued. Even the humour of the time adjusted to the new weather, without surrendering its kindness. A clerk remarked that the empire loved copies as much as gods love incense. He said this with respect and a small smile, and then he returned to copying. A boatman said the new inspectors had discovered the ancient art of checking knots twice. He said this while checking his own knot a third time, because that is how boats show their affection for being afloat. A cat became famous on one street for ignoring 3 different languages of command with exactly the same grace. The cat's name changed weekly. The the cat did not. The houses kept their modest geometry. There is something sweet in that. A courtyard with a jar and a niche for a lamp. A sleeping room whose door knows how to close without waking the baby. A shelf for tablets and a cedar chest for the woven wealth of winter. It is good to remember that empires move like weather fronts through houses just like this. People still tell stories while shelling legumes. They still argue kindly about the best way to prepare onions. They still make promises. They still keep them in the hope of being the kind of person they can admire. There were times when the city's sacred heart was bruised by absence. We will say it that way, with soft hands. A figure that held meaning left its home for a while, and the people learned the sound a room makes when something that belongs is away. After a time, the figure returned with ceremony and with music, and the room made a different sound. It sounded like a chest filling. It sounded like bread rising. People cried the quiet tears that do not demand a crowd. The broom that had kept sweeping felt suddenly like a friend who had been understood. Beneath the posture of obedience, Babylon retained the habits of a capable town council. When a canal clogged, it did not petition the stars. It sent men with baskets and wooden spades. The baskets moved from hand to hand like a slow drumbeat. Mud came up, water took its proper tone. Someone made a joke about fish appreciating tidy corridors. The joke became a favourite for a week and then retired with honour. When a bridge sighed too loudly, carpenters visited with new planks and the magic of pegs that know how to stay put. When a market stall needed shade, a boy climbed a post like a lizard and tied a knot a grown man could not have reached. That is how a city resists becoming a rumour about whose letterhead is in fashion. It works. Schools guarded more than literacy. They guarded tradition. The tales of a flood and a wise king did not vanish, because a new scribe with a different accent was watching the inventory of incense. Students still copied lines until their hands made the shapes without asking permission from their brains. Masters still corrected the posture of the wrist and the angle of the reed. They still said the thing teachers say in every age, once more, but better only by a little. The student still sighed and then discovered the strange happiness that lives inside practice. This is the quiet heroism that empire notices only when it wants to look clever. On rooftops, people watched the horizon for more than planets. They watched for columns of dust that meant travellers and for the kind of light that meant rain soon. They knew the difference between the thud of a closed gate and the thunk of a gate about to close. They knew what it sounded like when a messenger believed his news was good and when he believed his news was necessary. That is a set of skills, and they kept it sharp without boasting. The Empire sent craftsmen to supervise certain works. This is not unusual. They arrived with standards and measurements and advice about how to improve the improving of things. Babylon listened where listening helped. It pretended to listen in other places, while continuing to do what worked. There is wisdom in that. The city did not confuse courtesy with surrender. It placed the stone where the stone belonged and praised the visitor for naming day speeches that everyone agreed were impressive. Then it went on sanding and polishing and curing and balancing, which are the verbs that keep a place alive. Now and then orders would arrive that pressed too hard on the old fabric. The city answered with the only thing that repairs pressure. It answered with attention to the smallest units of trust. The neighbour who lends a tool and receives it back clean. The seller who slips one extra onion into the basket of the woman whose mother is unwell. The boy who holds a gate for the man whose hands are full and then runs home because night has drawn its shawl across the roofs. These gestures are the hidden architecture. They carry streets through bad seasons. There were rulers in this era who raised buildings as a way of raising their own names. There were others who broke things first and built later. The city had little choice in the matter on any given day, yet it always had one great choice. It could meet each policy with clarity about what made life workable. This clarity wore the face of tools, the plumb line, the scale, the simple ceramic that holds cool water at noon, the reed mat that admits breeze and holds Baxter. In their company, fear learns manners. At night, music continued to find rooms, a frame drum that called time without calling attention to itself, a lyre that did not need to be loud to be listened to, a singer who knew when to let a note be plain. Families gathered, where shadow met lamplight and told the stories that bridge one generation to the next. Some were sacred, some were practical, some were jokes that would not survive translation and did not need to. The city glowed in spots, not as one blaze, but as many little constellations of comfort. It's tempting to imagine these centuries as a narrow hallway that only leads to the next famous door. Resist that temptation. The hallway is a house. People lived full lives here. A girl learned the balance of a full jar and surprised herself by not spilling a drop. A shepherd came to market and bought a comb because he had fallen in love and wanted his hair to audition for a better life. A scribe grew old and discovered that he had copied a paragraph so many times he could see it even with his eyes closed. He told his grandson that a good line of law is just a poem with its sleeves rolled up. The grandson laughed and wrote it down. As the 7th century draws near its later years, drums in the distance begin to sound slightly different. Old alliances loosen like knots after a rain. New names collect around the idea of change. The markets notice first. Caravans begin to appear with faces that have practiced hope. They carry stories about a leader who speaks in the local way and believes in repair as much as victory. They bring rumours about walls that will be mended by hands who grew up under their shade. The city listens without hurrying. It has learned not to rush toward any trumpet. It keeps its broom moving. It keeps the temple floors untroubled. But it is ready in the way a field is ready when the plough is oiled and waiting. In the final years of this chapter, you can feel the city turning its attention toward its own voice again. Not away from the realities that still circle beyond the gates. Not away from the obligations that still ask to be met. Toward its own voice. It sounds like builders who have kept their tools, sharpened them in quiet, and now carry them into the sun. It sounds like elders who speak as if they are unrolling a plan they wrote on the inside of their ribs. It sounds like children who know the steps of the procession without looking, and who will one day teach those steps without noticing they are teaching. That is heritage working as it should. Let us walk one evening seen before we close our eyes. The festival road has been swept of every stone that would argue with a bare foot. The blue dusk deepens against brick the way water deepens in a jug. The priests lift their hands at the right turn and the right gate opens in the right mood. Musicians find the measure that makes walking feel like a kind of floating. Neighbours nod to one another, not because a messenger tells them to, but because the city has trained their necks to say yes to belonging. Far off, an empire is still writing its memos to itself. Here, the notes of a hymn turn corners with ease. The god rides beneath the canopy, and the canopy knows the streets from memory. Back in the household, lamps are trimmed for the last hour. A mother lifts a pot and sets it aside where it will not argue with tomorrow. A father dampens a reed mat and lays it across the threshold for the night breeze to soften. A child falls asleep in the posture of a cat sprawled according to secret mathematics. The stylus rests beside a tablet that will carry a list to market at dawn. The list is not a list of titles and thrones. It is a list of lentils and flour, and a reminder to ask the rope merchant about a better knot. You step to the door and let the night settle over your shoulders. The river speaks its long sentence again. The city that has bowed and stood and bowed again is upright in the simplest and best way. It is upright in its rooms. It is upright in its habits. It is upright in the thought that tomorrow it will be asked to work and will answer with the grace of old skills. The tall neighbour still stands where it stands. The sky still keeps the planets punctual. Your lamp still throws its little triangle of gold upon the wall, and the wall accepts it like a gift. When sleep comes, it carries the scent of clay and oil and cooling bread. It carries the comfort of knowing that cleverness is useful, but steadiness is a deeper talent. In the morning, the city will rise again to the steady drum of its own chores. It will mend what needs mending. It will honour what needs honouring. It will write what needs to be remembered. Beyond the horizon, a new chapter is taking on shape. The foundation is here. The tools are here. The hands are ready. Good night, Babylon between empires. Good night, builders who made repair a form of devotion. Good night, scholars who trusted the sky to teach patience. Good night, merchants who weighed silver until fairness learned the path to the centre of the pan. Good night, festival road that never forgot its steps. Good night, river that makes the moon into ribbons and carries them away to keep them safe. Rest now. The next breath will belong to a city about to grow brilliant again. Begin with colour, a colour that refuses to be merely blue. The glaze on Babylon's great gate catches the sun and turns it into bottled sky. Lions stride across those bricks as if the wall itself remembers how to walk. The processional way runs straight ahead, smooth as a promise. The city has decided to look marvellous again, not with noise, but with craft that holds its breath and glows. A new house leads the work. Nabopolassar steadies the boat. His son builds like a man whose morning tea includes mortar. Nebuchadnezzar raises courtyards and palaces and the famous gateway where bulls and dragons keep eternal company. Streets widen and then feel suddenly intimate where shade pools. Temples are scrubbed until they shine. Workshops hum the old songs of chisel and kiln. The city is not just surviving, it is showing off, though with the manners of a host who offers water first and boasts later. Walk beneath the arch. Your sandals find a rhythm on fired brick. The heat of the day slides up your shin and becomes memory as soon as you step into shadow. Perfume from incense hangs in the corridor like a delicate scarf. Trumpets mark the pace. Drums find a heartbeat that even careful people cannot resist. Above your head, bricks hold a slice of noon, as if time were a glaze that could be laid on thick and fired to a durable shine. In the palace, a steward unrolls schedules that reach from one end of the room to the other. There is building, then checking, then building again. Glaze kilns breathe like sleeping animals. Stonecutters make the kind of square that has opinions. Gardeners coax shade from climbing vines and carry water in rows of clay jars that feel heavier every flight of stairs. There are tales of a wonder garden. Some point it to this city, some send it elsewhere. What matters, without waking the room, is that Babylon had a talent for presenting amazement as if it had been there all along. The daily city does not vanish inside this grandeur. Bakers still argue with their ovens. A bronze caster still reads the mood of a poor by the way the stream speaks. A weaver ties off a border and pats it the way a mother pats a blanket that has learned to behave. Children stand on their toes for processions and afterward chase one another down lanes that smell of sesame and heat. A scribe buys figs and tells himself they are for the office. He knows, and the figs know they are not. Scholars climb rooftops and keep their old appointment with the sky. Planets hold their slow conversations indifferent to gates and kings. The students copy lines that have crossed centuries without losing their posture. The old stories live beside the new building works, the way a lamp stands near a window. The lamp knows its job. The window knows its own. Together they make a room honest. News from far fields carries names that have learned to be permanent. To the east, a great empire stretches itself like a cat, and then gets to work. Cyrus of Persia approaches, and when he enters the city, the streets do not forget how to be streets. There is a change of umbrella above the rooftops. There is not a change in how bread is baked, how ropes are checked, how canals are kept obedient with spades and baskets. Babylon slides under new administration the way a river slides under a new bridge. It keeps going. Under the Persian kings, the city becomes a prized jewel that knows it is prized. Officials arrive with tablets and patience. The language of the office mingles with the language of the market, and both decide to get along. Taxes know where to stand, repairs know who to ask, the temples continue their long maintenance of meaning. The priests set out sacred vessels with the same care a careful cook gives to the best pan. The god receives offerings at the hour that has always been right. Continuity, which often looks like quiet, does its excellent work. Walk at dusk along the processional way. The bricks shift from blue to the deep colour of plums. The carved lions seem to lean in and listen as footsteps thin. A porter from the temple carries a folded cloth that smells of cedar and incense. A mason brushes dust from his sleeves and glances back at a line of wall that now lies straight from one corner to the next. In a courtyard, a woman turns a jar so its mouth can catch the last of the breeze. The city sets itself in a night like a table set for supper. Then, a young king from the west draws the map toward himself with a steady hand. Alexander takes the broad road east, and the world recalculates its routes. After victory, he comes to Babylon, not with a fist, but with eyes. He looks up at the gate. He walks the long street that has practiced being splendid for generations. He offers what is due at the sacred places and speaks of rebuilding a tower whose roots still remember how to be tall. Plans bloom faster than flowers. Surveyors lift their cords. Scribes sharpen their reeds and label a new bundle of tablets with quiet satisfaction. The city receives him the way an old house receives new paint. It remains itself while it brightens. The river approves with its long sound. Craftsmen nod because work is work and good work is a kind of prayer. Even the street cats adopt a thoughtful air as if invited to advise on matters of style. At a table near the gate, elders sip water cooled by porous clay and judge that admiration is the most pleasant kind of conquest to endure. Night falls on a Babylon that has belonged to many crowns and refused to abandon its habits. Lamps are trimmed. The wick catches and grows a modest triangle of light on plaster. Somewhere upstairs, a map is unrolled on a low table and held down with a bronze weight that once served a market stall. The weight keeps honest company with a ruler and a string. In the lane, a child counts the paces between two familiar stones and announces the number to the stars. Soft humour wanders the rooms like a helpful breeze. A palace accountant wonders if a conqueror can be invoiced for enthusiasm. A builder declares that bricks are the city's favourite conversation partner because they never interrupt and always remember what was said. A priest tells a junior not to fuss with tassels that are already perfect and then fusses with them himself. Laughter stays small and close and kind. At the end of this long story, what remains is not only triumph or title. What remains is the feel of brick that has learned patience. The quiet certainty of a scale pan finding the middle. The smell of sesame and warm bread. The tone of a river that has delivered the moon to the same bend of water for as long as anyone can remember. The beauty of a gate glazed to the colour of sky so the city can borrow a piece of heaven for daily use. Stand once more before the arch. Run your hand along the line where two bricks meet and make peace. For a moment you can hear the whole city in that seam. The first laws and their neat wedges, the long patience of Kassite caretakers, the years of mending beneath tall neighbours, the burst of blue and the sober umbrella of Persia, the step of a Macedonian who admired more than he changed on his first night within the walls. All of it is there, pressed into the mortar with human breath. Now let the picture grow small and come back to your room. The lamp makes a gold field on the wall. The jar on the shelf keeps its cool promise. Outside your window, whatever river you know remembers its route. Sleep is ready to cross the gate. Babylon will be there in the morning with its tools and its recipes and its good memory for the names of streets. It will be there in the glaze of a clear sky. It will be there in the sound a well-made door makes when it closes softly and keeps the night where the night belongs. Good night, city of blue bricks. Good night, lions that walk forever without moving. Good night, river that threads the moon and gives it back at dawn. The gate stands, the road remembers, the lamp glows. The story rests, and so may you. And so, our journey for tonight comes to a quiet close. The story lingers, like the last glow of candlelight, as you drift further into rest. If these gentle wanderings bring you peace, I invite you to like and subscribe so that whenever you wish, you may return and we can travel together once more. For now, dear listener, may your dreams be kind and your night be restful. Until next time.